Brought to you by WikiVD Documentaries. 2017 Qatar diplomatic crisis. The 2017 Qatar diplomatic crisis, also referred as the 2017 Middle East crisis, occurred as a result of several countries abruptly cutting off diplomatic relations with Qatar. These countries included Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt. The severing of relations included withdrawing ambassadors, and imposing trade and travel bans. Saudi Arabia and other countries have criticized Al Jazeera and Qatar's relations with Iran, and accused Qatar of funding terrorist organizations. Qatar denied that it supports terrorism, given that it has assisted the United States in the war on terror and the ongoing military intervention against ISIL. Saudi Arabia's actions were verbally supported by United States President Donald Trump. Many countries in the region, including Turkey, Russia, and Iran, called for the crisis to be resolved through peaceful negotiations. Background: Qatar has had differences with other Arab governments on a number of issues. It broadcasts Al Jazeera. It is accused of maintaining good relations with Iran, and it has supported the Muslim Brotherhood in the past. Qatar is a close ally of the United States, hosting the largest American base in the Middle East, Al Udeid Air Base. The countries withdrawing diplomatic relations accuse Qatar of supporting terrorism, of interfering with their internal affairs, and of maintaining relations with Iran. Qatar denies allegations that it supported terrorism, and pointed out that it has been contributing to the US-led fight against ISIL. Issues of contention: Qatar maintains relatively good relations with Iran. Qatar and Iran share ownership of South Pars North Dome gas condensate field, by far the world's largest natural gas field, with significant geostrategic influence. In April 2017, after a 12-year freeze, Qatar lifted a self-imposed ban on developing the gas field with Iran, which would require cooperation between the two countries. According to Jim Crane, energy research fellow at Rice University's Baker Institute, Qatar used to be a kind of Saudi vassal state, but it used the autonomy that its gas wealth created to carve out an independent role for itself. Above all, gas prompted Qatar to promote a regional policy of engagement with Shiite Iran to secure the source of its wealth. According to David Roberts, a Qatar foreign policy expert at King's College, London, if a conflict erupts between America and Iran, Qatar would literally be caught in the middle. If you are Qatar, you look across the water and you think, when Iran did have the opportunity to take a few Arab islands, they did it. Qatar needs to have the ability to peacefully go about their business of sucking all the gas out of that giant field. Iran could make that process very difficult. A senior fellow of Middle Eastern Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations concludes that there's a recognition of the general tendencies of the Gulf states to hedge their bets. There's always a question in the back of the minds of the leadership: how much faith can they put in the US? Since he took power in 1995, Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani believed Qatar could find security only by transforming itself from a Saudi appendage to a rival of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia withdrew its ambassador to Doha from 2002 to 2008 to try to pressure Qatar to curb its individualistic tendencies. This approach broadly failed. The crisis has turned into a proxy battle between partners and adversaries of Iran, and UAE politicians claim that Qatar invests billions of dollars in the US and Europe and then recycles the profits to support Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood and groups linked to al-Qaeda. Qatar hosts the American military base from which the U.S. directs its regional war against extremism, yet it also owns media networks responsible for inciting many of the same extremists. Qatar also used its contacts to help negotiate peaceful exchanges of hostages for the safe evacuation of civilians from areas affected by the Syrian civil war. However, Qatar also sent its forces to fight against alleged Iranian-backed militias in the current Yemeni civil war, and has supported rebels fighting the Iranian-allied government of Bashar al-Assad in the Syrian civil war. Qatar has supported the Muslim Brotherhood in the past. Saudi Arabia and other Gulf monarchies see the Muslim Brotherhood as a threat, as it ideologically opposes hereditary rule. The government of Egypt has long viewed the Muslim Brotherhood as enemy number one. In 2011, during the Arab Spring, Qatar supported the Egyptian protesters agitating for change, as well as the Muslim Brotherhood. By contrast, Saudi Arabia supported Hosni Mubarak, and currently supports Abdel Fattah el-Sisi since the 2013 Egyptian coup d'état. Qatar has been accused of sponsoring terrorism. Some countries have faulted Qatar for funding rebel groups in Syria, including al-Qaeda's affiliate in Syria, the al-Nusra Front. Although the Saudis have done the same, both Qatar and Saudi Arabia have been involved in the CIA-led Timber Sycamore covert operation to train and arm Syrian rebels. Qatar has hosted officials from the Afghan Taliban and Hamas. Qatar defends this move by saying it is trying to act as an intermediary in regional conflicts. For example, Qatar hosted talks between the Taliban and the Afghan government in 2016. On the 27th of May 2017, the newly re-elected Iranian President Hassan Rouhani held a phone call with Qatar's Emir Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani. Rouhani told Qatar's Emir, "The countries of the region need more cooperation and consultations to resolve the crisis in the region, and we are ready to cooperate in this field." Former U.S. Defense Secretary and ex-CIA Chief Robert Gates stated in May 2017 that he does not know instances in which Qatar aggressively goes after networks of Hamas, Taliban, al-Qaeda, and that my attitudes toward al-Udeid and any other facility is that the United States military doesn't have any irreplaceable facility. Qatar hosts the largest American base in the Middle East, the Al-Udeid Air Base, which has been used by the United States in its campaigns in Iraq, Syria and Afghanistan. According to the WSJ, during President Barack Obama's first term, some members of his National Security Council lobbied to pull a U.S. fighter jet squadron out of Al-Udeid to protest Qatari support of militant groups in the Middle East. Previous diplomatic incidents. In 2002, Saudi Arabia removed their ambassador from Qatar over Al Jazeera's alleged critical stance towards Saudi Arabia. Diplomatic relations were re-established in 2008, after assurances that Al Jazeera would limit its coverage of Saudi Arabia. In March 2014, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates removed their ambassadors from Qatar, citing interference with their internal affairs. But the situations were eventually diffused after Qatar forced Brotherhood members to leave the country 8 months later. In February 2015, Egypt-Qatar relations deteriorated after the Egyptian Air Force conducted airstrikes on suspected ISIL positions in neighboring Libya following the beheading of 21 Egyptian Coptic Christians. The airstrikes were condemned by Al Jazeera, who broadcast images of civilian casualties. Additionally, Qatar's foreign ministry expressed reservations over the airstrikes. This prompted Tariq Adel, Egypt's Arab League delegate, to accuse Qatar of supporting terrorism. Egyptian citizens also launched an online campaign denouncing the Qatari government. The Gulf Cooperation Council rejected Egypt's accusations, and its Secretary-General regarded the statements to be false. Shortly after, Qatar recalled its ambassador to Egypt for consultations. Events leading up to the crisis. The exact reasons for the diplomatic break-offs are unclear, but contemporary news coverage primarily attributes this to several events in April and May 2017. April 2017 negotiations. In April 2017, Qatar was involved in a deal with both Sunni and Shiite militants in Iraq and Syria. The deal had two goals. The immediate goal was to secure the return of 26 Qatari hostages who had been kidnapped by Shiite militants while falcon hunting in southern Iraq and kept in captivity for more than 16 months. The second goal was to get both Sunni and Shiite militants in Syria to allow humanitarian aid to pass through and allow the safe evacuation of civilians. According to the New York Times, this deal allowed the evacuation of at least 2,000 civilians from the Syrian village of Madaya alone. What outraged Saudi Arabia and the UAE is the amount of money Qatar had to pay to secure the deal. According to the Financial Times, Qatar paid $700 million to Iranian-backed Shia militias in Iraq, $120,140 million to Tahrir al-Sham, and $80 million to RR al-Sham. Riyadh Summit 2017. As part of the Riyadh Summit in late May 2017, many world leaders, including U.S. President Donald Trump, visited the region. Trump gave strong support for Saudi Arabia's efforts in fighting against states and groups allied with Iran and the Muslim Brotherhood, leading to an arms deal between the countries. Trump's support may have induced other Sunni states to fall in line with Saudi Arabia to take a stance against Qatar. Trump's public support for Saudi Arabia emboldened the kingdom and sent a chill through other Gulf states, including Oman and Kuwait, that feared that any country that defies the Saudis or the United Arab Emirates could face ostracism as Qatar has. Hacking of Qatari websites. The Qatar news agency website and other government media platforms were allegedly hacked in May 2017. According to Qatar-based Al Jazeera, hackers posted fake remarks on the official Qatar news agency attributed to the Emir of Qatar, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, that expressed support for Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah and Israel. The Emir was quoted as saying, "Iran represents a regional and Islamic power that cannot be ignored and it is unwise to face up against it. It is a big power in the stabilization of the region." Qatar reported that the statements were false and did not know their origin. Despite this, the remarks were widely publicized in the various Arab news media, including UAE-based Sky News Arabia and Al Arabiya. On 3 June 2017, the Twitter account of Bahraini Foreign Minister Khalid bin Ahmed Al Khalifa was hacked. Initially, alleged intelligence gathered by the U.S. security agencies indicated that Russian hackers were behind the intrusion, first reported by the Qataris. However, a U.S. official briefed on the inquiry told the New York Times that it was unclear whether the hackers were state-sponsored, and The Guardian diplomatic editor Patrick Wintour reported that It is believed that the Russian government was not involved in the hacks. Instead, freelance hackers were paid to undertake the work on behalf of some other state or individual. A U.S. diplomat said that Russia and its ally Iran stood to benefit from sowing discord among U.S. allies in the region, particularly if they made it more difficult for the United States to use Qatar as a major base. The FBI sent a team of investigators to Doha to help the Qatari government investigate the hacking incident. Later, New York Times reported that the hacking incidents may be part of long-running cyber war between Qatar and other Gulf countries that was only revealed to the public during the recent incidents, and they noted how Saudi and UAE media picked up the statement made by the hacked media in less than 20 minutes, and began interviewing many well-prepared commentators against Qatar. Al Jazeera. In May 2017, the email account of the UAE's ambassador to the US, Yusuf Al-Otaiba, was hacked. The emails were seen as embarrassing because they allegedly showed links between the UAE and a pro-Israeli group, the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. The story was covered by Al Jazeera and HuffPost Arabi, both of which are funded by Qatar. Arab countries saw the media coverage of the alleged email hack as a provocation by Qatar, and deepened the rift between the two sides. On the 9th of June, Al Jazeera's media network was the victim of a cyber attack across all its platforms. Breaking of diplomatic relations. Between 5 and 6 June 2017, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Yemen, Egypt, the Maldives, and Bahrain all separately announced that they were cutting diplomatic ties with Qatar. A variety of diplomatic actions were taken. Saudi Arabia and the UAE notified ports and shipping agents not to receive Qatari vessels as ships owned by Qatari companies or individuals. Saudi Arabia closed the border with Qatar. Saudi Arabia restricted its airspace to Qatar Airways. Instead, Qatar was forced to reroute flights to Africa and Europe through Iranian airspace. Saudi Arabia's central bank advised banks not to trade with Qatari banks in Qatari rials. Qatar verbally criticized the ban. The Foreign Ministry of Qatar criticized the ban, arguing that it undermined Qatar's sovereignty. The Foreign Minister of Qatar, Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani, said that Saudi statements regarding Qatar were contradictory. On one hand, Saudi Arabia claimed Qatar was supporting Iran. On the other hand, it claimed Qatar was funding Sunni extremists fighting against Iran. All GCC countries involved in the announcement ordered their citizens out of Qatar. 3 Gulf states gave Qatari visitors and residents 2 weeks to leave their countries. The foreign ministries of Bahrain and Egypt gave Qatari diplomats 48 hours to leave their countries. Qatar was expelled from the Saudi Arabian-led intervention in Yemen. Kuwait and Oman remained neutral. Kuwaiti mediators in Riyadh were presented with a list of Saudi demands to Qatar. These included cutting off all links with Iran and expelling resident members of Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood. Curbs on the freedom of Al Jazeera to stop interfering in foreign countries' affairs and to cease any funding or support for terrorist organizations. As of 10 June 2017, 10 sovereign governments have cut diplomatic ties with Qatar. The Tobruk-based government of Libya claimed to have cut diplomatic ties with Qatar despite having no diplomatic representation in the country. The government of the self-declared Republic of Somaliland announced on 10 June 2017 that it has cut diplomatic ties with Qatar in solidarity with Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Egypt. As of the 12th of June 2017, 4 countries have downgraded diplomatic ties with Qatar without fully cutting relations. Multiple countries in the United Nations called for the resolution of the diplomatic crisis through dialogue. Global reactions. Germany's Foreign Minister Sigmar Gabriel expressed support for Qatar and criticized the severing of ties. He accused U.S. President Donald Trump of stirring up conflict in the Middle East. India said that it viewed the crisis as an internal matter of the Gulf Cooperation Council and was primarily concerned with the Indian expatriates in the region. Indonesia Foreign Minister said the diplomatic disconnection by Arab countries against Qatar is very influential on Indonesia. On June 10, 2017, Indonesian President Joko Widodo called the President of Turkey and Emir Qatar to find a way to resolve the conflict, considering Indonesia itself is an Islamic country, and this conflict occurred in Ramadan. Israel said that the crisis opened up opportunities for cooperation in the fight against terrorism, claiming that the Arab countries that cut off their diplomatic relations with Qatar did not do so because of Israel or the Palestinian issue, but because of their fear of radical Islamic terrorism. Reports that Mauritius had cut ties with Qatar were refuted by the Mauritian government. A report in the Saudi Gazette incorrectly stated that Mauritius had broken off ties with Qatar, and that Mauritius's vice prime minister had issued a communiqué pledging his country's support for Saudi Arabia. This prompted further erroneous reports by other outlets. However, Mauritian Vice Prime Minister Shokutali Sudan, in an interview with Le Déclic Media Group of Mauritius, refuted claims that he had issued any such communiqué, and Mauritius's Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a statement that Mauritius continued to maintain diplomatic relations with Qatar. Pakistan stated that it had no plans to cut diplomatic relations with Qatar. Member of the Parliament passed a resolution in National Assembly of Pakistan urging all countries to show restraint and resolve their differences through dialogue. Federal Minister for Petroleum and Natural Resources said that Pakistan will continue to import liquefied natural gas from Qatar. A 6-member Qatari delegation headed by a special envoy of the Qatari Emir visited Pakistan and asked Pakistan to play a positive role in resolving the diplomatic crisis. Prime Minister of Pakistan Nawaz Sharif said Pakistan would do all it can to help resolve the crisis and called on the Muslim world to play a role in ending hostilities. TRT in a report said that Pakistan would deploy 20,000 troops in Qatar, but the Foreign Office denied media report. The Philippines suspended the deployment of migrant workers to Qatar on the 6th of June. However, on the 7th of June, they allowed the deployment of the returning workers and those with overseas employment certificate, but still suspended the deployment of new workers. The suspension was later fully lifted on the 15th of June. United States President Donald Trump claimed credit for engineering the diplomatic crisis in a series of tweets. On the 6th of June, Trump began by tweeting, "During my recent trip to the Middle East, I stated that there can no longer be funding of radical ideology. Leaders pointed to Qatar. Look." An hour and a half later, he remarked on Twitter that it was good to see the Saudi Arabia visit with the king and 50 countries already paying off. They said they would take a hard line on funding extremism, and all reference was pointing to Qatar. Perhaps this will be the beginning of the end to the horror of terrorism. This was in contrast to attempts by the Pentagon and State Department to remain neutral. The Pentagon praised Qatar for hosting the Al Udeid Air Base and for its enduring commitment To regional security, U.S. Ambassador to Qatar, Dana Shell Smith, sent a similar message. Earlier, the U.S. Secretary of State had taken a neutral stance and called for dialogue. Qatar hosts about 10,000 U.S. troops at Al Udeid Air Base, which houses the forward operating base of United States Central Command that plays a commanding role in U.S. airstrikes in Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. A Pentagon spokesperson claimed the diplomatic crisis would not affect the U.S. military posture in Qatar. On the 8th of June, President Donald Trump, during a phone call with the Emir of Qatar Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, offered as a mediator in the conflict, with a White House meeting between the parties if necessary. The offer was declined, and Qatari officials stated, the Emir has no plans to leave Qatar while the country is under a blockade. On the 9th of June, Trump once put the blame on Qatar, calling the blockade hard but necessary, while claiming that Qatar had been funding terrorism at a very high level, and described the country as having an extremist ideology in terms of funding. This statement was in conflict with Secretary of State Tillerson's comments on the same day, which called on Gulf states to ease up the blockade. In the 13th of June 2017, after meeting with Tillerson in Washington, Saudi Foreign Minister Adel Al-Jubeir stated that there was no blockade and, "What we have done is we have denied them use of our airspace. And this is our sovereign right, and that the King Salman Center for Humanitarian Aid and Relief would send food or medical aid to Qatar if needed." On the 7th of June, the Turkish parliament passed, with 240 votes in favor and 98 against, a legislative act first drafted in May allowing Turkish troops to be deployed to a Turkish military base in Qatar. In the 13th of June 2017, during a speech, President of Turkey Recep Tayyip Erdogan called the isolation of Qatar as inhumane and against Islamic values, and that victimizing Qatar through smear campaigns serves no purpose. Gabon's foreign ministry also made a statement condemning Qatar for failing to respect international commitments and agreements on counter-terrorism. On the 8th of June, Egypt's Deputy UN Ambassador Ihab Mustafa called for the United Nations Security Council to launch an investigation into accusations that Qatar paid up to $1 billion to a terrorist group active in Iraq to free 26 Qatari hostages, including members of its royal family, which would violate UN resolutions. The Qataris were kidnapped the 16th of December 2015 from a desert camp for falcon hunters in southern Iraq. The hostages were released 18 months later in April 2017. Qatari diplomats responded to the Egyptian calls for an investigation by reaffirming their commitment to the UN resolutions towards eliminating the financing of terrorism. Eritrea refused a request by Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates to cut relations with Qatar, citing its strong ties with the brother people of Qatar. On the 12th of June, however, they issued a statement calling the isolation of Qatar one initiative among many in the right direction that envisages full realization of regional security and stability, while not breaking off relations themselves. The United Kingdom's Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, stated that Qatar needs to do more to stop the funding of extremist groups, but also urged Gulf states to ease the blockade. In June 2017, the government of Qatar hired American attorney and politician John Ashcroft to lobby on its behalf and rebut international allegations of supporting terror. Reaction of non-governmental organizations. Amnesty International condemned the crisis and accused Saudi Arabia, Bahrain and the Atoing with people's lives. James Lynch, Deputy Director of Amnesty International's Global Issues Program, claimed, "These drastic measures are already having a brutal effect, splitting children from parents and husbands from wives. People from across the region, not only from Qatar, but also from the states implementing these measures, risk losing jobs and having their education disrupted. All the states involved in this dispute must ensure their actions do not lead to human rights violations." Amnesty International received reports from victims unable to visit their family members, students being stranded, and workers being unable to return to their jobs in opposing nations. Norwegian Refugee Council expressed fears that the crisis would affect reconstruction in Palestine, as Qatar is a major source of humanitarian and infrastructure aid to Palestine. Impact. On 6 June 2017, Emirates Post of UAE halted postal services to Qatar. Nearly 80% of Qatar's food requirements come from Gulf Arab neighbors, with only 1% being produced domestically, and even imports from outside the Gulf states usually crossing the now closed land border with Saudi Arabia immediately after the cutting of relations. Local reports indicated residents swarmed grocery stores in hopes of stockpiling food. Many food delivery trucks were idled along the Saudi-Qatari border. On 8 June 2017, Qatari Foreign Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani said, "We're not worried about a food shortage, we're fine. We can live forever like this. We're well prepared." Qatar has been in talks with both Turkey and Iran to secure supply of water and food. On the 11th of June 2017, Iran sent 4 cargo planes with fruit and vegetables and promised to continue the supply. Turkey has pledged food and water supplies to go along with their troop deployment at their Turkish military base in Qatar. Thank you for watching. Brought to you by WikiVD Documentaries. Please like and subscribe below. Please like and subscribe below.